The flames tore through the wooden barn like a beast unleashed, its roar drowning out the cries of the helpless. In the chaos, when grown men hesitated and women wept, it was not a sheriff, a rancher, or a gunslinger who rushed into the inferno. It was an orphan, barefoot, with nothing but desperation and courage guiding him. He vanished into the smoke and emerged moments later, carrying a child clutched tight against his chest. The fire scorched his skin, the smoke clawed at his lungs, but in his arms was life saved, and for one fleeting moment, the town looked upon him as more than a boy without a name. The crowd that gathered around the wreckage that night whispered in awe. For years, the orphan had been invisible, a shadow lingering on the edge of streets, surviving on scraps and kindness too scarce to last. But in that instant, he became the heartbeat of the town, the hero no one expected and everyone needed. The child he carried survived, gasping for air, while the fire devoured everything else. In the heart of the Old West, where legends were written in smoke and dust, this orphan had carved his own without a single bullet fired. Yet beneath the murmurs of gratitude, darker whispers stirred. The fire had not been an accident. Men with grudges, fueled by greed and violence, had set the barn ablaze, their crime intended to leave the family broken and their enemies silenced. The orphan's courage had defied them, exposing their cruelty, and in doing so, painted a target on his back. For in the West, saving a life often meant stealing power from those who thrived on fear, and such men never forgave. The boy, unaware of the storm he had awakened, found himself with a bed to rest on that night, offered by the very townsfolk who once turned him away. For the first time, he tasted the sweetness of belonging, the fragile warmth of being seen. Yet as he closed his eyes, far beyond the town's edge, the culprits plotted in the shadows. They had lost their secret to fire, but vengeance burned hotter than any flame. When dawn rose over the horizon, the town celebrated a boy who had become a hero overnight. But in the silence of his small room, the orphan felt the prickle of unease, as though the walls themselves whispered warnings. And they were right, because in the Old West, every act of courage came with a price. And for the orphan who saved a child from the fire, that price was already on its way, knocking at his door. The morning after the fire, the orphan awoke to the sound of voices outside the small cabin where townsfolk had let him sleep. For the first time, he was not spoken of as a nuisance or a burden, but as a savior. Farmers tipped their hats when they passed. Mothers clutched their children closer and whispered prayers of thanks, and even the sheriff, a man slow to praise, admitted the boy had more grit than most grown men. For a moment, the orphan felt the warmth of belonging, something he had hungered for all his life. But deep inside, unease gnawed at him, because he knew that in the West, glory never came without shadows. The family of the rescued child showered him with gratitude. They gave him food, clean clothes, and for the first time in years, he sat at a table instead of scavenging from scraps. Yet as the boy ate, his eyes caught the father's trembling hands, the way he kept glancing at the door. The fire had not just taken their barn, it had stripped away their safety. Everyone in town suspected who was behind the blaze, but no one dared to say the names aloud. Fear hung heavier than smoke in the air. As dusk fell, the orphan lingered near the ruins of the barn. The earth was still black with ash, the smell of burnt wood clinging to the wind. He ran his hands over the charred beams, feeling not just the loss of a building, but the weight of an unspoken truth. Those who had started this fire would not forget his defiance. By saving the child, he had undone their cruelty, and that made him their enemy. The thought chilled him, but another burned brighter. The child lived, and that was worth any danger. The sheriff rode by, his horse's hooves kicking up dust, and stopped near the ruins. He looked down at the boy, his eyes narrow, the brim of his hat casting long shadows. "You did a brave thing," he said, his tone heavy, "but brave things make enemies." The orphan nodded, swallowing hard, as the sheriff rode off. The boy knew those words weren't a warning. They were a promise of what was coming. That night, as he lay in bed, the orphan heard a sound that froze his blood. A knock, slow, deliberate, echoing through the silence like a hammer striking wood. His heart pounded, and though the townsfolk thought him safe, he knew the truth. The men who had lit the fire had come, not to steal, not to burn, but to claim their revenge. The door creaked open, and moonlight spilled into the cabin. The boy held his breath, his small body trembling under the thin blanket. Two shadows slipped inside, their boots whispering against the wooden floor. Their voices were low, but he could hear the venom dripping from every word. "That brat ruined everything," one hissed. "If we don't silence him, the whole town will turn against us." The orphan gripped the edge of the blanket, his chest rising and falling like a drum. He wanted to scream, but fear strangled his voice. Instead, he slipped silently from the bed and crouched low, moving toward the corner of the room. Every step was agony, the floorboards threatening to betray him with a single creak. His heart pounded so loudly he feared the intruders could hear it. They moved closer, searching the shadows, their guns glinting in the pale light. The boy knew one wrong move would mean the end. Suddenly, a cry pierced the night, the rescued child from the next room, stirring in his sleep. The intruders froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. In that moment of distraction, the orphan seized his chance. He lunged for the window, shoving it open with desperate strength, and hurled himself into the dirt outside. The men cursed, shouting as they fired into the night, bullets tearing through wood and silence alike. The boy sprinted barefoot, the cold earth biting his feet, but his fear carried him faster than any bullet. The town stirred with the noise, lanterns flickering to life as men and women stepped out of their homes. The boy collapsed near the well, gasping for breath, while the intruders melted back into the shadows, unwilling to be seen. The sheriff arrived moments later, his revolver drawn, but the culprits were already gone. He helped the boy to his feet, his jaw tight. "It's begun," the sheriff muttered grimly, and the boy understood. The fire had only been the first warning. Now the war had come to his door. The orphan, still trembling, looked into the sheriff's eyes and found no comfort there, only the reflection of truth. He was no longer just a boy. By saving a life, he had crossed a line he could never step back over. He was part of the West's unforgiving game, where vengeance traveled faster than the wind and mercy was a language few spoke. And though fear clung to him, another feeling rose slowly in its place: resolve. The sheriff gathered a few men to guard the family that night, but even their presence did little to ease the tension. The orphan sat by the hearth, his knees drawn to his chest, staring at the flickering flames. Each crackle of wood reminded him of the fire that had nearly consumed the child, and each shadow made him fear the culprits were lurking just beyond the walls. He felt the weight of the town's silence pressing in on him. Everyone knew who had set the blaze, yet no one dared to speak their names aloud. By morning, whispers rippled through the saloon and the marketplace. Some praised the orphan's courage, calling him a boy with the soul of a gunslinger. Others muttered that he had brought trouble upon them all. In the West, a hero was only celebrated until his bravery endangered others. The boy could feel the shift in the air, the way certain eyes lingered on him not with gratitude, but with suspicion. He had saved a child, yes, but in doing so, he had stirred hornets from their nest. The family he had rescued tried to shield him, but fear etched their faces deeply. The father confessed in a trembling voice that the men behind the fire were part of a gang that ruled the outskirts with iron fists and loaded guns. They were known for burning fields, stealing cattle, and silencing anyone who stood in their way. By rescuing the child, the orphan had humiliated them in front of the entire town. Their revenge would not stop with one failed attempt. That afternoon, the sheriff called the orphan aside. "Boy," he said, his voice heavy, "you've earned respect, but you've also earned enemies. They'll come again. They don't forget." His eyes softened, just for a moment, and he placed a revolver on the table. "You'll need to learn to defend yourself." The orphan's hands trembled as he touched the weapon, the cold steel foreign, yet strangely familiar in his grip. He had never held a gun before, but now it seemed the only thing standing between him and the shadows that hunted him. The boy nodded, his fear slowly hardening into something stronger. He had been an orphan all his life, a nameless figure surviving at the mercy of others. But now the West had given him a choice: remain a victim, or rise as someone who could no longer be silenced. As the sheriff's eyes lingered on him, the orphan felt it, the first spark of the man he was destined to become. That night, the boy lay awake under the weight of the revolver resting beside him. The silence of the town was broken only by distant coyotes, their howls echoing across the prairie like warnings. He thought of the culprits, ruthless men who thrived on fear, and wondered how long it would be before they struck again. His young heart beat fast, but beneath the fear was a flame he had never known: determination. He would not let the child he saved, nor the town that now watched him closely, fall prey to fire again. At dawn, the sheriff began teaching him. The revolver felt heavy, almost too much for his small hands, but his grip tightened with each lesson. The sheriff showed him how to steady his breath, how to listen to the silence before the shot, how to let the weapon become an extension of his resolve. The orphan's aim was clumsy at first, but with every failed shot, he grew steadier. In the Old West, survival was never handed. It was earned through scars, sweat, and the courage to keep trying when fear clawed at your chest. The townsfolk gathered to watch from a distance, some curious, others doubtful. A few scoffed, whispering that a boy could never stand against hardened killers. But others, remembering the night of the fire, saw in him something rare, bravery that could not be taught. The boy felt their eyes on him, the weight of expectation pressing down like the sun's relentless heat. For the first time, he was not invisible, and though the attention frightened him, it also fueled him. That evening, as he practiced alone near the edge of town, a stranger approached, an older ranch hand with a scar that cut deep across his cheek. "You've made enemies, boy," the man said, his voice rough but steady. "But you've also made something stronger: hope. Folks here don't say it, but they see in you what they've lost: courage." He handed the boy a worn leather holster and walked away without another word. The orphan stared at the gift, feeling the weight of responsibility settle deeper on his shoulders. The horizon bled red as the sun dipped low, and the boy holstered the revolver for the first time. His reflection in the steel was not the face of an orphan anymore. It was the beginning of a legend. Yet, even as he felt the fire of purpose burn in his chest, he knew the truth. The men who had come knocking once would return. And next time, they would not leave without blood. The following days passed with an uneasy calm, the kind that pressed down on the town like the stillness before a storm. The orphan walked through the streets with his head held higher than before, the revolver at his side, both a comfort and a burden. People greeted him differently now, some with admiration, others with fear. Children followed him at a distance, whispering about the boy who had faced fire and lived, while grown men muttered that no good could come from placing a weapon in the hands of someone so young. Yet the boy could feel the shift in the air. He knew the culprits were watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. Every creak of a shutter, every unfamiliar horse track near the edge of town set his nerves on edge. The sheriff warned him not to wander alone, but the orphan understood one truth: danger in the West did not wait for permission. It came when it wanted, swift and merciless. And he had already crossed the line from nameless boy to marked target. One evening, as the sun bled orange over the horizon, a rider approached from the north. Dust rose behind the horse's hooves, and the air grew tense as townsfolk stepped out to see who dared come uninvited. The rider dismounted at the saloon, and whispers spread quickly. He was one of them, one of the gang responsible for the fire. His scarred face twisted into a sneer as he pushed through the doors, daring anyone to stop him. Fear rippled through the crowd, but no one moved. The orphan watched from the shadows, his hand resting on the revolver at his side. Every instinct told him to stay hidden, to let the sheriff handle it. But when he saw the man laugh, saw him speak of the fire as if it were a joke, something inside the boy snapped. He had risked his life to save a child, and now the man who had nearly burned them alive walked freely, mocking the pain he had caused. The boy's fear hardened into anger. That night, he could not sleep. The sound of the man's laughter echoed in his ears, fueling a fire of his own. He realized then that bravery was not only about running into flames. It was about facing the kind of darkness that laughed at suffering. And as he lay awake, he understood that the fight was no longer just about survival. It was about justice, and justice in the West was always paid for in blood or in sacrifice. The sheriff sensed what was brewing in the boy's heart and confronted him the next morning. "You've got fire in your eyes, son," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "But fire can burn you faster than it burns them." The orphan clenched his fists, his voice trembling with resolve. He laughed about it, about the fire, about the child. If no one stops them, they'll burn this whole town. The sheriff's gaze softened, and for a moment, he saw not just a boy but the making of a man forged by pain. Still, he warned, justice and revenge look the same in the dark. Don't lose yourself. The boy listened, but deep down he knew the sheriff's words could not silence the storm inside him. He trained harder, his aim growing sharper, his stance steadier. Each shot he fired into the dry boards of the corral was a vow whispered to himself. He would not let fear rule him again. If the culprits came, he would stand, even if it meant facing them alone. The West did not forgive weakness, and he refused to be the frightened orphan cowering in the shadows. Word spread quickly that the gang was gathering again, their numbers swelling on the outskirts. Farmers whispered of stolen cattle, travelers spoke of ambushes, and the tension in town grew unbearable. Every lantern flickering in the night seemed like a signal, every howl in the distance a warning. The orphan felt the weight of it pressing down on his chest, yet with it came a strange clarity. He had nothing to lose but the name he had yet to carve for himself. One evening, the family of the rescued child came to him quietly. The father, eyes heavy with worry, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You saved my son when no one else would," he said. "If they come again, we'll stand with you." The orphan looked at the man, astonished, and for the first time felt something he had never known: loyalty. Not the loyalty of blood, but of choice. In that moment, he realized his actions had bound others to him, and that gave him strength greater than any weapon. As night fell, a storm gathered on the horizon, thunder rolling like war drums across the prairie. The boy stood at the edge of town, the revolver at his side, watching the clouds swallow the last of the daylight. He knew the gang would come. He could feel it in the restless wind, in the way the earth seemed to shiver beneath his boots. And, when they did, he would no longer be just an orphan. He would be the spark that decided whether the town fell to ashes or rose from the fire. The storm finally broke. Dark clouds rolled over the prairie, lightning flashing across the horizon as though the heavens themselves were warning of what was to come. The townsfolk huddled indoors, their lamps dimmed, speaking in hushed tones of the gang that prowled the outskirts. The orphan, however, did not hide. He stood near the sheriff's office, revolver holstered at his side, his eyes fixed on the rain-slicked streets. He was young, but the fire in his chest burned older than his years. He knew the gang would not wait much longer. The sheriff approached, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "They'll come tonight," he said simply, no trace of doubt in his voice. The boy nodded, his jaw set. For days he had felt this moment approaching, a weight pressing closer with every breath. Now that it was here, fear and resolve wrestled inside him, but resolve held strong. "Then I'll be ready," the orphan whispered, his voice steady despite the storm. The town was not without its loyal few. The father of the rescued child stood by with a shotgun, his hands trembling, but his heart unwilling to abandon the boy who had saved his son. A couple of ranchers joined them too, their faces grim, their loyalty born from respect. They were not soldiers, not lawmen, but they knew that if they turned away, the gang's fire would consume them all. In that moment, the orphan realized he was no longer alone. His courage had awakened something in others. As night deepened, the hoofbeats came, slow at first, then louder, a chorus of steel and thunder rolling into town. Shadows on horseback emerged from the rain, torches burning in their hands, their laughter cutting through the storm like knives. The gang rode with the confidence of men who believed they owned fear itself. But this time, the town did not scatter. The orphan stepped forward into the street, rain soaking his hair, his small frame dwarfed by the men who sought to destroy him. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the moment. A boy stood before killers, a revolver at his side, while behind him a few brave souls took their places. The gang leader sneered, spitting into the mud. "You should have burned with the barn, boy." But the orphan's eyes, steady and unflinching, gave no ground. He had walked through fire once before, and tonight he was ready to do it again. The gang dismounted, their boots splashing the mud as they spread out across the street. Torches hissed in the rain, casting long, jagged shadows on the wooden walls. The townsfolk peered from behind shutters, their breaths held tight, knowing this night would decide whether courage or cruelty ruled their town. The orphan's heart hammered, yet his hand never wavered near the revolver. He remembered the sheriff's words, "Steady your breath, steady your aim." The leader stepped forward, his face twisted with arrogance. "Hand over the boy," he barked, his voice echoing against the storm. "Or this town burns again." Silence followed, broken only by the thunder rolling overhead. Then, to the orphan's astonishment, the father of the rescued child raised a shotgun. His voice shook, but his resolve was steel. "If you want him, you'll go through me." The gang laughed, but the sound was hollow. It masked their unease at seeing ordinary men stand against them. The sheriff stepped beside the boy, his revolver drawn, his presence solid as bedrock. "This ends tonight," he growled. The orphan's breath steadied, his fear slowly transforming into fire. He was no longer the nameless boy scavenging scraps. He was the one who had saved a child, the one who had defied death once already. And now, with the eyes of the town upon him, he felt the weight of destiny pressing him forward. The standoff stretched, the storm raging around them. Every drop of rain felt like a drumbeat, every flash of lightning a call to fate. The gang shifted uneasily and used a defiance, especially from a boy. But the orphan met their eyes with something more dangerous than rage, conviction. In the Old West, bullets could kill, but conviction could outlive them all. Then, with a cry lost to the thunder, the gang surged forward. Guns were drawn, steel clashed with fire, and the town erupted in chaos. The orphan's hand flew to his revolver, the lessons of every practice shot racing through his mind. As lightning lit the night, he pulled the trigger, stepping into the storm not as an orphan, but as the beginning of a legend. The first shot cracked through the storm, echoing off the wooden storefronts. The orphan's revolver kicked in his hands, the recoil jarring but true. One of the gang staggered back, his torch falling into the mud, its fire extinguished by the rain. Chaos erupted, the street filled with smoke, thunder, and shouts as bullets tore through the night. The boy ducked low, his heart pounding, every nerve alight with fear and determination. This was no practice. This was survival. The sheriff fired steady and sure, each shot deliberate, cutting through the chaos like a seasoned warrior of the frontier. The father of the rescued child stood firm too, though his hands shook, his trigger pulled with the desperation of a man defending more than himself. He was fighting for his son, for his home, and for the boy who had shown them all what courage looked like. For a moment, the rain and smoke blurred friend from foe, but resolve sharpened the orphan's sight. He aimed again, and again, his breath steady as he remembered the sheriff's lessons. The gang, confident when they rode in, now faltered. They had not expected defiance from a handful of townsfolk, nor from a boy who should have been broken long ago. Their torches hissed in the rain, their boots slipping in the mud as the townspeople's courage spread like wildfire. Shutters flew open, and more rifles appeared. Ranchers, farmers, men who had once sworn to stay silent now took their stand. The orphan's bravery had ignited something greater than vengeance. It had awakened the town. Bullets whistled past, striking wood and shattering glass, but the boy did not retreat. He felt fear, yes, but within that fear was something stronger, the realization that this was his fight, his moment to carve a name where before there had been none. Lightning split the sky, illuminating his small frame in the center of the street, revolver steady, eyes unyielding. For the first time, the gang leader looked uncertain. And then, silence fell. Smoke drifted low, the rain washing blood into the mud. Several of the gang lay wounded, others retreating into the storm with curses on their lips. The boy's chest heaved, his revolver still warm in his grip. The sheriff stepped beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You stood when no one else would," he said. The orphan, panting, looked around at the faces emerging from the shadows, faces filled with awe, respect, and something else, hope. The gang leader, bloodied but unbroken, glared at the boy from the edge of the street. His sneer faltered, but his pride refused to yield. "This ain't over," he spat, mounting his horse. "The West remembers." With that, he rode off into the storm, his men following, leaving the town battered but unburned. The threat lingered, but the battle was won, for now. The people of the town exhaled as one, the weight of fear lifting, replaced by the fragile strength of unity. The orphan lowered his revolver, his arms trembling, not from weakness but from the enormity of what had just transpired. He was still a boy, but the West had stripped away the last traces of innocence. In the smoke and rain, he had faced death and defied it. The sheriff met his gaze and gave a single nod, a silent acknowledgement that the boy had crossed into manhood, not by age, but by fire. The family of the rescued child rushed forward, the father gripping the orphan's shoulders with tears in his eyes. "You saved him once," he said, voice breaking, "and tonight you saved us all." The boy wanted to speak, but the words would not come. Instead, he simply looked at the child, alive and safe, and knew in his heart that no vengeance, no fire, no storm had been in vain. As dawn broke, the streets bore scars of the night, splintered wood, broken glass, the dark stains of violence. Yet in those scars lay something the town had not felt in years: pride. They had stood together, not because they were fearless, but because one orphan's courage had shown them that even the weakest could defy cruelty. Legends in the West were often written with guns and blood, but this one had begun with a boy who chose to save a life instead of turning away. The orphan stood at the edge of town as the sun rose, golden light cutting through the clouds. He was still young, still nameless, but in the eyes of the people, he was something far greater. He was proof that courage, even when small, could change the fate of many. The West would not forget the night the orphan faced fire, faced vengeance, and stood tall. And neither would he. When the dust finally settled, the orphan stood not as a forgotten child, but as the echo of a truth the West never ignored: that courage can rise from the most unlikely hearts. He had walked through fire, faced down vengeance, and in doing so, transformed shame into strength and fear into resolve. The boy who once lived unseen at the edges of town had become the center of its survival, a reminder that legends are born not from privilege, but from the choices made when no one else dares to stand. The gang's retreat did not erase the scars they left behind, yet in those scars lay proof of resilience. The town that once doubted, once whispered of weakness, now looked upon the orphan as a mirror of their own capacity to endure. His bravery had stripped away the power of cruelty, showing that even the smallest spark could defy a storm. And though danger might return, the boy had already changed the course of his fate. He was no longer a nameless orphan, but a symbol of hope. The sheriff's nod, the father's gratitude, the townsfolk's newfound resolve, all tied together a single truth. In the Old West, survival was not just about guns or strength. It was about honor, sacrifice, and the courage to choose what is right even when fear pressed in from every side. The orphan had not only defended a child, he had awakened an entire town to its own strength. That awakening would ripple through every whispered tale, every retelling by firelight, ensuring his story would outlive him. This story lingers with a lesson as sharp as any bullet. It reminds us that the weight of our choices defines who we become, and that even those cast aside can rise to stand taller than the shadows that haunt them. The orphan's journey is not only about the West. It is about us all, about the courage buried within, waiting for the moment to break free. And sometimes, it is the very moment we fear the most that reveals who we were always meant to be. If this tale spoke to you, let its fire continue to burn beyond this video. Share your reflections in the comments. What part of the orphan's courage touched you most? Did you see your own battles mirrored in his? Remember to like this story and subscribe to the channel so we can keep uncovering the hidden truths and unforgettable legends of the West. Because stories like this are not just history, they are reminders that even the smallest voice can ignite the strongest flame.